The envelope was white, thick, the kind that doesn't bend. Aisha Coleman held it with 2 fingers, the way you hold something you already know you're going to put down. The ballroom was everything she wasn't. Crystal chandeliers. Men in suits that cost more than her car. Women draped in silk who laughed at exactly the right moments. The kind of room where money didn't just talk. It set the agenda, controlled the minutes, and adjourned the meeting. Park Tae-sung stood in front of her like a man who had never once in his 71 years been told no. He was smaller than she expected. That was the first thing. She had built him into something enormous in her mind. The name alone, the reputation, the way his representative had sat across from her desk like he was doing her a favor just by breathing her air. But in person, Tae-sung was compact. Still. The kind of still that isn't peace. The kind that's control. A gesture of appreciation, he said. His English was precise. Deliberate. Each word placed carefully, like furniture in a room designed to impress. Around them, conversations had slowed. Not stopped. These were people too polished to stare openly. But the radius of silence around the two of them was spreading. Aisha looked down at the envelope once. Then she looked back up at him. I don't take money to forget children. Someone nearby inhaled sharply. A glass stopped mid-air somewhere to her left. One of Tae-sung's advisors, a younger man in a charcoal suit, took a small half-step forward before catching himself. Tae-sung didn't flinch. His expression didn't crack. But something behind his eyes shifted. Something she couldn't name yet. Aisha turned the envelope over in her hands once, slowly, then held it back out to him. I don't care who you are, she said. Her voice was even. Not loud. She didn't need loud. I won't sell a child's future. The silence was total now. Whatever pretense of surrounding conversation had existed was gone. 40, maybe 50 people were watching a woman hand back money to a man who had never had money handed back to him. His advisor stepped forward again. Ms. Coleman, perhaps we could find a more appropriate setting to. She is speaking. Tae-sung's voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. The advisor stopped moving immediately, like a switch had been flipped. Tae-sung looked at Aisha for a long moment. Then something happened that nobody in that room would be able to fully describe afterward, because none of them could quite believe they had seen it. Park Tae-sung lowered his head. A full, deliberate bow. Not a nod. Not a tilt. A bow. In front of everyone. The room forgot how to breathe. Aisha stood completely still. Her heart was doing something complicated inside her chest, but her face gave nothing away. She had spent 15 years in rooms where she was the only black woman, the youngest person, the one without the title or the salary or the connections, and she had learned a long time ago that stillness was its own kind of power. When Tae-sung raised his head, his eyes were different. Heavier. You remind me, he said quietly, of the woman my son once loved. He took the envelope from her hand. Then he walked away. And Aisha stood in the center of that glittering room, surrounded by people who had witnessed something they didn't understand, feeling the echo of those words settle into her chest like a stone dropped into still water. The woman my son once loved. She didn't know that woman's name yet. She didn't know what had happened to her. She didn't know that the quiet, sad boy in the foster home in Atlanta, the one who drew figures and then crossed them out, was that woman's son. She didn't know any of it yet. But she would. 6 weeks earlier, Aisha Coleman was sitting at her desk in Atlanta eating a cold turkey sandwich and trying to save a child whose case number she already knew by heart. That was the job. That was always the job. Cold food, warm files, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from working too hard but from caring too much in a system that was not built for caring. Her office was small. One window that faced a parking structure. A plant her colleague Dina had given her 2 years ago that was somehow still alive despite everything. Stacks of files color-coded not by the department system but by Aisha's own. Red for urgent, yellow for watch, green for stable. She hadn't had a green file in 11 days. Her phone buzzed. Her supervisor, Carol, appearing in the doorway 2 seconds later the way she always did, as if the call and the visit were the same impulse. I sent you the park file, Carol said. She was a compact white woman in her 50s with reading glasses she never actually used for reading. She wore them pushed up on her head like a headband. International adoption dispute. Korean-American family, Atlanta connection. Paperwork flagged 3 times by 2 different county offices. Aisha set down her sandwich. Why is it coming to me? Carol's pause was 1 second too long. Because you're the best I have. Carol. Because 2 other workers already asked to be reassigned from it. There it was. Aisha pulled up the file on her screen. The boy's photo loaded first. 6 years old, approximately. Korean features. Eyes that looked older than they should have. The kind of eyes that have learned to observe rather than expect. The paperwork was altered, Aisha said, already scanning. 3 times. At least 3 that we can confirm. His original birth record lists the mother. The father line is blank. But the record was amended twice, and the Second Amendment actually removed details that were in the first version. Someone is actively erasing him. Someone with access and resources, yes. Aisha looked at the boy's photo for another moment. There was something around his neck. Small. Silver. The photo resolution wasn't high enough to read what it said. I'll take it, she said. Carol nodded. Then she paused at the door. Aisha. The family name on this case, she stopped. Started again. Just be careful with how far you push before we know what we're pushing against. Aisha looked up. The family name, Carol repeated, and her voice had gone quieter, almost reluctant. It's Park. She left before Aisha could ask what that meant. Aisha turned back to the screen. Back to the boy's face. Back to that small silver thing around his neck that she couldn't quite read. She opened a new document and began typing. She had no idea that by the time this case was over, she would be standing in a Los Angeles ballroom holding an envelope in front of one of the most powerful men on the West Coast. She had no idea that he would bow to her. She had no idea what it would cost to get there. Some stories are not just about what happens. They're about the strength it takes to stand your ground, to protect your dignity, and to demand respect, even when the world tries to take it from you. If you've ever had to make a choice that tested your courage, or refused to be bought, silenced, or pushed aside, then you're in the right place. This channel tells stories about women who cannot be broken, and the people who learn, sometimes too late, that integrity cannot be bought. Welcome to Afro Korean Tales and Stories. The file sat on her desk overnight. Aisha didn't open it again until morning, which was unusual for her. Normally, she couldn't leave a flagged case alone. Normally, the not knowing was worse than whatever she found inside. But something about Carol's face when she said that name, the slight tightening around the eyes, the sentence she didn't finish, made Aisha want one more night of not knowing what she was walking into. She used that night to think about Marcus instead. She did that sometimes. Not as punishment, though it felt like it. More like a practice. A way of keeping herself honest. Marcus had been 7. A quiet kid with a gap in his front teeth, and a habit of folding paper into shapes that didn't quite resemble anything, but that he would present to her with complete seriousness, like she should obviously understand what they were. She always said she did. His case had come to her during the worst period of her department's history. 3 workers out on leave, caseloads doubled, supervisors quietly telling everyone to prioritize, which was just a professional way of saying let some things slide. Aisha had visited the home twice. Everything looked stable. The foster family was warm, attentive, appropriately concerned. The paperwork was clean. She had signed off on the 3-month review and moved to the next file. 6 weeks later, Marcus was gone. The investigation afterward found things she had missed. Signs that required more visits, more questions, more time that she had not given because the system had made her feel that time was a luxury none of them could afford. She had taken 3 weeks off after the funeral. Then she came back. Her supervisor at the time had asked if she was sure she was ready. No, she had said. But I'm not leaving. She came back different. Slower in the ways that mattered. More visits. More questions. More copies of every document, photographed and stored on her personal drive the night she received them. because she had also learned that paperwork had a way of disappearing when someone didn't want it found. She never signed off quickly again. She never would. The next morning she opened the park file all the way. What she found over the next 4 hours was not a messy case. Messy cases were almost a relief. They meant confusion, oversight, bureaucratic failure. This was different. This was a case that had been deliberately constructed to look complete while being hollow at its center. The boy had been placed through an intermediary agency that had since dissolved. The agency's records had been transferred to a county database that had suffered a convenient server failure 18 months ago. The birth record listed the mother by full name, a woman named Janelle Reeves, Atlanta, deceased, and listed the cause of death as a car accident 14 months prior. The father line was blank. But in the first version of the birth record, the one that had been amended and should have been replaced but that some underpaid county clerk had failed to fully purge from the backup system, the father line was not blank. It read, Park Jun-ho. Aisha sat back in her chair. She photographed that screen immediately. Then she wrote the name down by hand in the small notebook she kept in her bag. Then she looked up Park Jun-ho and felt the room get slightly colder. Son of Park Tae-sung. Estranged. Formerly based in Seoul, now Atlanta. Small import business, legitimate by all public records. Minimal social media presence. No criminal record. She searched Janelle Reeves next. The obituary was brief. Survived by no immediate family. Car accident on I-285. Late October, 3 years ago. No other vehicles involved. Aisha read that line twice. No other vehicles involved. Single car accident, I-285, a stretch of highway she drove herself twice a week. Wide lanes. Good lighting. The kind of road where single car accidents happened when someone fell asleep or lost control. Or when something else entirely happened and no one looked closely enough to know the difference. She closed the obituary and sat very still for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called the foster placement agency handling the boy's current case. The coordinator who answered was polite, efficient, and carefully vague in a way that Aisha recognized immediately as coached. Yes, the child was currently in placement. No, she couldn't confirm details over the phone. Yes, a review was scheduled. No, she couldn't confirm the timeline. Is there a family member who has been in contact regarding the child? Aisha asked. A pause. I'm not able to confirm. I'm the assigned caseworker, Aisha said. I have full access to this file. I'm asking you whether a family member has made contact. Another pause. Longer. There was an inquiry, the coordinator finally said. Through a legal representative. About 3 weeks ago. Representing whom? The coordinator's voice dropped slightly, like she was aware of something she didn't want to be aware of. The inquiry came through a firm that represents the Park Family Trust. Aisha thanked her and ended the call. She sat at her desk for exactly 30 seconds. Then she opened a new evidence folder on her encrypted personal drive, dragged every photograph she had taken into it, and labeled it with a date and a single word. Marcus. Because that was what this was. That was what it had always been. A child at the center of something too large for him. A child who needed someone to look closely enough. Someone who wouldn't sign off and move to the next file. She was going to look closely. She was going to look at everything. Park Jun-ho was not supposed to exist the way he did. That was how his father had always made him feel, like a version of something that had gone slightly wrong in production. Functional. Even impressive, in some lights. But not quite what was intended. Park Tae-sung had intended an heir. He got a son instead. The difference in his world was significant. Jun-ho was 34 now and had spent the last 6 years rebuilding himself from the outside in. The import business was real. Small but clean. He sourced traditional Korean ceramics, textiles, premium teas, things with actual value, things made by actual people, and sold them through boutiques and specialty stores across the Southeast. It wasn't empire-level money. It was enough. It was honest. After the life he'd left, honest felt like the most radical thing he could choose. He had an apartment in Midtown Atlanta. A decent car. A small team of 3 people who worked with him. Not for him, he was deliberate about that distinction. He cooked for himself most nights. He ran in the mornings. He called his mother in Seoul on Sundays, and they spoke carefully around the subject of his father the way you speak carefully around a wound that hasn't fully closed. To the outside world, Jun-ho looked like a man who had found his footing. Inside, he was still standing in the same October night 6 years ago, getting a phone call, hearing the word single car accident, and knowing, not suspecting, knowing, that the explanation was wrong. Her name was Janelle. He had met her at a conference, of all places. An import trade expo in downtown Atlanta. She was there representing a small artisan collective, and she had walked up to his display table and looked at a ceramic tea bowl for a long moment before saying, completely seriously, "This is the most beautiful thing I've seen all day, and I've been walking around for 4 hours, so that's saying something." He had laughed before he could decide whether to. That was how it started. She was from Atlanta, raised by her grandmother after her mother left, and her father was never fully in the picture. She had built herself from scratch the way people do when no one hands them anything, with specific, deliberate choices and a spine you couldn't bend without it breaking back. She didn't move carefully around his background the way other people did. She didn't go quiet when he mentioned Korea or his family or money. She asked direct questions and sat comfortably in the answers. She pushed back when she disagreed and never made it feel like a negotiation. He fell completely, irreversibly in love with her within 4 months. He knew it was real because it scared him in a way he couldn't manage. His father's people started making contact around month 5. Not Tae-sung directly. That wasn't his style. A representative. Then another. Polite, measured conversations about responsibility and reputation and the importance of decisions that reflected the family's position. Once, a very expensive dinner with an older Korean businessman who spoke for 40 minutes about legacy before Jun-ho stood up, thanked him for the meal, and left. He told Janelle everything. That was the thing people who hadn't known her would never understand. She wasn't a secret he kept. She was the person he told everything to. She listened to all of it and then said, "So what do you want to do?" "Stay," he said. "I want to stay." She smiled. "Then stay." He had plans to propose. He was saving for a ring that felt worthy of her, which kept him raising his budget every time he thought he had found the right one. She would have laughed at him for that if she'd known. She would have told him she didn't care about the ring. He never got to find that out. The call came on a Tuesday. October. Cold that year in the way Atlanta cold sometimes is. Not brutal, but persistent. A detective. Respectful. Professional tone. "I'm sorry to inform you. 285. Single vehicle. No other parties involved." Jun-ho had stood in his kitchen holding the phone long after the call ended. The ceramic bowl on his counter, one of his own products, had seemed suddenly unbearable to look at. He had tried afterward to ask questions. To push. He'd hired someone to look at the accident report. The investigator came back with a clean report and a careful expression and told Jun-ho that sometimes accidents were just accidents. Jun-ho had paid him and never called him again. Not because he believed him. Because grief, at its worst, convinces you that truth will only make the loss heavier without making it smaller. So he had packed the questions away. Built the business. Ran in the mornings. Called his mother on Sundays. He had no idea Janelle had been pregnant when she died. He had no idea there was a boy in the Atlanta foster system wearing a necklace he had made with his own hands. He would find out soon. But on the same Tuesday morning that Aisha Coleman opened the park file for the second time and photographed an unamended birth record, Jun-ho was in his office reviewing inventory reports and feeling, for no reason he could immediately identify, an unease that had lived in his chest for 6 years suddenly shift. Not disappear. Shift. Like something that had been stationary had just begun to move. The foster home smelled like dryer sheets and something faintly sweet. Banana bread, maybe, or a candle trying to approximate it. Aisha had been in hundreds of foster homes. She stopped performing comfort when she walked through the door years ago. She walked in the same way she did everything. Present, quiet, watching. The placement coordinator, a woman named Bev who wore her keys on a lanyard and talked slightly too fast, walked her through the intake information in the hallway while the children were at the kitchen table doing homework. Aisha listened to all of it and looked past Bev's shoulder toward the table the entire time. The boy was at the far end. He was small for 6, or whatever age he actually was. The birth record discrepancy made even that uncertain. Korean features, as she had expected from the photo. Dark hair cut neatly, which meant someone here was paying attention to the details. He sat completely straight, which most 6-year-olds did not do, and his eyes were on his paper but not moving. He wasn't doing homework. He was waiting for something. Aisha wasn't sure what. He's been here about 6 weeks, Bev was saying. Adjusting. He's not a difficult child. Not in the behavioral sense. He's just very, she paused, looking for the word. Contained. Does he talk? Occasionally. More than when he first came. He'll answer direct questions if he trusts the person asking. He hasn't fully decided yet who that is. Aisha nodded. She thanked Bev and asked for a few minutes with him. She sat down at the far end of the table. Not right next to him. 2 seats away. She put her bag on the chair beside her and took out a file folder, which she didn't open, and set it flat on the table. Then she took out a small paperback novel she was halfway through and opened it. She read. He didn't look at her. 4 minutes passed. She turned a page. He glanced over. Just once. Then back at his paper. She kept reading. At the 7-minute mark, without looking up from her paper, he said, "What's that book about?" "A woman who goes looking for her sister," Aisha said, without looking up either. "And finds something she didn't expect." A pause. Does she find the sister? Still reading. He considered this. That's not an answer. No, she agreed. It's not. He was quiet again. But the quality of the quiet had changed. He was still contained, but the container had shifted slightly. Not open, but no longer sealed quite so tightly. Aisha slowly reached into her bag and took out a small blank notepad and a 4-pack of crayons she kept for exactly these kinds of visits. She placed them in the center of the table. Not toward him. Just available. She went back to her book. 2 minutes later, he reached over and took the crayons. She didn't acknowledge it. She kept reading. He drew something. She could see it in her peripheral vision, but she didn't look directly. She turned another page. He drew for several minutes, the crayon making small quiet strokes on the paper. Then he slid the notepad toward her. She looked at it. A house. Simple, the way children draw houses. Square, triangle roof, 2 windows, a door. A sun in the corner. 2 stick figures outside the house, side by side. One larger, one smaller. Then, through the larger figure, a thick waxy X in dark blue. Aisha looked at the drawing for a long moment. She didn't say anything immediately. She didn't let her expression do what it wanted to do. She looked at it the way she had learned to receive information. Fully, without flinching. "Who's this?" she asked, touching the smaller figure gently. He looked at the paper. "Me." "And this one?" She indicated the crossed-out figure. He didn't answer. He picked up the crayon again and added something to the smaller figure instead. A small circle at the neck. A necklace. Aisha looked at the actual necklace around his throat, the silver one from the intake photo that she hadn't been able to read clearly on screen. "Can I see that?" she asked, nodding toward it. He reached up and held it out toward her without taking it off. She leaned in carefully. The engraving was small. Clean. Someone had taken care with it. One word. June. Aisha sat back slowly. She kept her face even. But inside, something was arranging itself rapidly. The birth record, the blank father line, the name she had written in her notebook, the accident that had no other vehicles, the legal representative making inquiries 3 weeks ago. She looked at the boy. "What's your name?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment with those old, careful eyes. "They call me Daniel here," he said. "But that's not my name. What is your name?" He touched the necklace once with 2 fingers. Then he said, quietly and with complete certainty, "My mom called me June." That night, Aisha sat in her car outside the foster home for 11 minutes before starting the engine. She called her encrypted drive, added 4 new photographs, and opened a search on her phone. Park Jun-ho, Atlanta, Korean, import business. She found him in 40 seconds. His face appeared on a small business feature from a local magazine, 2 years old. He was standing in his showroom next to a display of ceramic bowls. Aisha looked at the photo. Then she thought of the boy's face. The resemblance was not subtle. She put the car in drive. She had barely pulled out of the parking lot when her phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. 4 words. Close the file, Ms. Coleman. She didn't close the file. She went home, made tea she didn't drink, and sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, her notebook, and the photograph of the engraving on the necklace that she had managed to capture when the boy held it toward her. The unknown number that had texted her was dead when she called back. Disconnected or routed through something that didn't want to be found. She reported it to her department's security protocol, a largely ceremonial process that she did anyway because documentation was how you built a record, and a record was how you protected yourself. Then she kept working. By midnight she had built a timeline. Janelle Reeves, alive. Jun-ho and Janelle, together. The family pressure, which she couldn't document but which the pattern implied clearly. Janelle, pregnant, which the original birth record confirmed. The accident, October, 3 years ago. The child, placed through an intermediary agency that no longer existed, with documents that had been deliberately altered to remove his father's name. Someone had built this, piece by piece, with access to legal channels and institutional systems. This wasn't disorganized. This was architecture. She went to bed at 1:15. She set an alarm for 5:45. She was in her office by 6:30. The first thing she noticed was that the light in the hallway was on, which it shouldn't have been. The building had motion-activated lighting. The hallway lights only stayed on if someone was in the corridor. She slowed. Listened. Nothing. She waited another 10 seconds. Still nothing. She went to her office, unlocked it, and stopped in the doorway. Everything looked the same. Her desk. Her files. Her plant from Dina, still impossibly alive in the corner. But her file cabinet drawer, the one she always closed fully, a habit she'd had for years, was open 1 inch. She stood very still. Then she put on gloves. She kept them in her bag now, since she had learned to treat her own files like evidence, and she checked the cabinet. Her physical copies of the Park file were gone. She stood in the middle of her office and breathed steadily for a moment. Then she sat down, opened her laptop, and accessed her encrypted personal drive. Every photograph was there. Every document. Every note. 37 files. All present. All dated and labeled. She felt something settle in her chest that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite satisfaction. It was something colder and more deliberate than either of those. She had known something like this might happen. She had prepared for it. She had prepared for it because of Marcus. Because Marcus had taught her that the greatest danger was believing the system would protect what it was supposed to protect. She started printing backup copies when Carol appeared in the doorway at 8:15. Carol looked at the open cabinet. Then at Aisha. Then at the printing stack growing beside the computer. "Tell me," she said. Aisha told her everything. The timeline. The architect. The text. The open drawer. Carol was quiet for a long moment. She sat down in the chair across from Aisha's desk, not the visitor's chair, the second work chair that Aisha kept for colleagues, which meant she was settling in to think rather than manage. "The Park family," Carol said finally. "You understand what that name means?" "I'm starting to." "They have a legal infrastructure that is," Carol paused, choosing carefully, "significant. Aisha, if they've already been in the building." "They haven't intimidated me out of a case," Aisha said. "They've walked into my office without permission, removed property, and sent me a threatening text. Which I've already reported. That's not power. That's panic." Carol looked at her. "Why would they be panicking?" "Because someone is looking. And I don't think anyone has really looked at this before." Carol pressed her lips together. Outside in the hallway, the rest of the department was beginning to arrive. coffee cups and keyboards, and the specific morning energy of underpaid people who came back every day anyway. I need to escalate this for your protection, Carol said. I know. And Aisha, Carol stopped. I'm not dropping it, Aisha said. Carol nodded once. She stood up. I know. She paused at the door. Photograph everything. Even things you think don't matter. Always, Aisha said. Carol left. Aisha turned back to her screen and opened a new search. She typed, Park Tae-sung. The results loaded slowly, like the internet was deciding how much to reveal. Then they came in all at once. Business records, profile pieces in Korean financial publications, a Wall Street Journal mention from 4 years ago describing him as a reclusive but influential figure in Korean-American trade networks. She read for 20 minutes. By the end of it, she understood why 2 other caseworkers had asked for reassignment. She also understood, in a way that had nothing to do with bravery and everything to do with a photograph of Marcus that she kept in the inside pocket of her bag, that understanding why people walked away had never once made her want to join them. She was still reading when the second message came. Not a text this time. An envelope. Placed on her desk by someone from the front. Delivered by hand. No return address. A courier who had apparently given only a first name. She opened it. Inside was a single photograph. Her car. In her driveway. Time-stamped 11:47 p.m. Last night. While she had been sitting at her kitchen table with cold tea and a laptop, building her timeline. Someone had been outside her house. Aisha set the photograph flat on her desk. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and dialed. Not Carol. Not the department security line. Not anyone in the building. She dialed the number she had found the night before for Park Junho's import business. It rang 3 times. Park Imports, a man's voice said. Steady. Careful. The kind of voice that had learned to be both. Aisha said, Mr. Park. My name is Aisha Coleman. I'm a child welfare caseworker with the Atlanta Department of Family Services. She paused once. I think you and I need to meet. Today. And I think when I tell you why, you'll agree. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 4 seconds. Where? He said. Junho was already standing when she walked in. That was the first thing Aisha noticed. Not that he was tall, not that he was well-dressed, not that the small coffee shop he had chosen was neutral territory in the careful way that only deliberate people choose neutral territory. She noticed that he was standing. Like he had been standing for a while. Like sitting had stopped being an option the moment she called. He looked exactly like the magazine photo. And nothing like it. The photo had captured his surface. The cheekbones, the careful posture, the controlled professional expression. What it hadn't captured was the weight he was carrying. You could see it in person. In the set of his jaw. In the way his eyes moved to her face and stayed there, not scanning, not calculating. Just looking, the way people look when they are bracing for something they already half know is coming. Aisha sat down across from him without extending her hand first. She had thought about that on the drive over. In her professional life she always led with the handshake. It was equalizing, grounding. But this wasn't a professional visit in the ordinary sense, and she had learned to trust the instincts that her training and her grief had built together. She put the folder on the table. Didn't open it. Thank you for meeting me, she said. You said it was about a child. His voice was even. Controlled. But his hands, flat on the table, pressed down slightly on the word child. Like the word had weight he hadn't expected. It is. Whose child? Aisha looked at him steadily. I think you already have a theory. Something moved across his face. Not surprise. The opposite of surprise. The expression of a person whose long-held, carefully suppressed suspicion is about to be confirmed, and who is not sure they are ready for what that confirmation will cost them. Tell me, he said quietly. She opened the folder. She placed the original birth record, the unamended one, the one with his name in the father field, flat on the table in front of him. She watched him read it. He read it twice. She could tell by the way his eyes moved. Once fast, once slow. The first pass was shock. The second was the mind refusing to accept what the eyes had already recorded. He didn't speak for almost a full minute. When he did, his voice had changed. Not broken. Changed. Like something structural had shifted quietly inside it. She was pregnant. Yes. When she died. Yes. He looked at the birth record again. His name in the father field. The date. Janelle's full name, printed in the clean bureaucratic font of official documentation, as alive on that paper as she would ever be again. The child, he said. Where is he? In foster care. Atlanta. He's been there 6 weeks. Before that, 2 other placements over approximately 2.5 years. She paused. His original name was removed from his records. Someone replaced it. But the placement he's in now, the woman running it is attentive. She kept his necklace with him. Junho's head came up. Small silver necklace, Aisha said. 1 word engraved. His jaw tightened. His eyes closed for exactly 3 seconds. When he opened them, they were different. Not wet. Harder. The kind of hard that comes after something soft has been destroyed enough times. I made that necklace, he said. I gave it to Janelle. It had my name on it because... He stopped. Started again. Because I wanted her to have something of mine while I saved for the ring. The coffee shop around them continued its ordinary morning. 2 women at the counter were laughing about something. The espresso machine hissed. Someone's phone played 4 notes of a ringtone and stopped. None of it touched the table where they were sitting. Mr. Park, Aisha said carefully. The accident that killed Janelle. I've looked at the report. Single vehicle. No other cars. A stretch of I-285 with good visibility and wide lanes. She kept her voice level. Have you ever had any reason to question the official account? He looked at her for a long time. Every day for 3 years, he said. Aisha nodded slowly. She had prepared for many possible answers. That one still landed like something falling. Then I need you to tell me everything, she said. Not what you can prove. Everything you know, felt, suspected. We build from there. He studied her face. She could feel him assessing, not in a hostile way, but in the way of someone who had learned the expensive lesson that trust extended carelessly came back damaged. Why are you doing this? He asked. This isn't a normal case review. You're here on a Saturday. You called me directly. You're carrying documents in an encrypted folder. His eyes dropped briefly to her bag, then back up. You're not operating through standard channels. No, she said. I'm not. Why? Because standard channels are where this case went to disappear, she said. 3 times. He absorbed that. And because, she added, and this part she hadn't planned to say but it came anyway, there was a boy I didn't protect once. And I will not do that again. Something in Junho's expression shifted. Not sympathy, something quieter and more equal than sympathy. Recognition. The look of one grieving person identifying another. He reached over and turned the birth record back toward himself. He looked at his name in the father field one more time. Then he began to talk. He talked for 40 minutes. Aisha didn't interrupt. She took notes in her small notebook, but mostly she listened, the way she had learned to listen, with her whole attention and no performance of response. He told her about the pressure from his father's people. The dinner he had walked out of. The way Janelle had never once seemed afraid, only clear-eyed and certain that they would outlast whatever the family sent. He told her about the morning of the call. The detective's voice. The specific phrasing, no other vehicles involved, that had snagged on something in his mind and never let go. He told her he had hired an investigator who came back clean, and that he had always wondered whether the investigator had been clean too. Aisha wrote that down and underlined it. When he finished, the coffee shop was half empty. The morning rush had cleared. The light through the window had shifted from early gray to something warmer. Junho looked at his coffee, which he hadn't touched. I want to see him, he said. I know, Aisha said. We have to do this carefully. If your family's legal team gets any indication that you're involved before we've built enough of a record. My father, Junho said quietly. Not a question. A recognition. You think he knows? Aisha looked at him directly. I think your father has known where that child was for 3 years. The silence that followed was different from all the other silences. This one had a specific quality, the quality of a world rearranging itself around a fact that cannot be unfound. Junho's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and went very still. He turned it so Aisha could see. A message from a soul number she didn't recognize. In Korean she couldn't read. But she didn't need to read Korean to understand the timing. What does it say? She asked. Junho's voice was quiet, flat in a way that wasn't calm. It says, "Come home. Now is not the time for old questions." His father already knew they were meeting. His father arrived in Atlanta on a Thursday. No announcement. No press. No advance notice to anyone except the small security detail that moved with him like a second shadow. Junho found out the same way he had always found out things his father didn't want him to know in advance. Too late, and from someone other than Tae-sung himself. His business contact called at 7 a.m. Your father landed at Hartsfield 40 minutes ago. I thought you should know. Junho thanked him, ended the call, and stood in his kitchen for a moment with his phone in his hand. Then he called Aisha. She picked up on the second ring, which told him she was already awake and already working, which by now he had come to expect. In the 9 days since their coffee shop meeting they had been in near-daily contact, building the record she needed, cross-referencing documents, tracking the movement of the case through the legal system. She was methodical in a way that commanded respect and occasionally made him feel like he was working alongside something more precise than a person. But she was also, and this surprised him every time, funny. Not in a performed way. In the way of someone who had seen enough difficult things that dark humor had become a kind of survival language. She made one quiet observation during a document review that made him laugh for the first time in longer than he could track, and then immediately returned to the file like she hadn't done anything at all. He had told himself it didn't mean anything. He was not entirely convincing himself. My father is in Atlanta, he said. A brief pause. When did he land? An hour ago. He didn't tell you. He never tells me. He arrives. He expects orientation to follow. Does he know we've been building the record? He knew we met the day we met. He knows everything eventually. He paused. What he doesn't know is how much we have. Good, Aisha said. We keep it that way. Don't contact him first. Let him come to you. And Junho, she said his name carefully, the way she always did, each syllable present and intentional rather than blurred together the way some people did it. Don't tell him anything about the legal filing. Not yet. I know. I mean it. Not a word. Aisha. His voice was patient. I have been managing information around my father since I was 11 years old. I understand the assignment. Another pause. This one felt different, like something that would have been a laugh if the circumstances were different. Okay, she said. Call me after. Tae-sung arrived at Junho's office at noon. He came alone, or as alone as Tae-sung ever was, which meant his security waited in 2 cars outside and his aide waited in the lobby. But he walked into Junho's showroom without the aide, which was either a gesture of intimacy or a strategic choice to keep the conversation off the record. With Tae-sung it was always both. He looked at the showroom for a moment before acknowledging Junho. The ceramic pieces, the textiles, the small handwritten cards describing each artisan's region and process. He moved through it the way he moved through everything. Measuring. This is what you chose, he said finally. Not a question. Yes, Junho said. It's smaller than I expected. Most honest things are. Tae-sung looked at him then. Something brief and complicated moved through his expression before it closed again. They sat in Junho's small back office. Junho poured tea without asking, a reflex from boyhood, one of the few that had survived. His father accepted the cup with both hands, and for a moment the gesture was so familiar it was almost unbearable. There is a caseworker, Tae-sung said. African-American woman. Atlanta Department. She has been investigating the adoption matter. I'm aware. You've met with her. Yes. Tae-sung set his cup down precisely. I would like you to stop. I know you would. Jun-ho. His voice carried the particular weight it had always carried. Not loud, but layered. Decades of a specific kind of authority compressed into 2 syllables. This matter is more complicated than she understands. Than you understand. There are things that were done that cannot be undone, and the exposure of those things will not return what was lost. Jun-ho was very still. What was done? He said quietly. Tae-sung didn't answer. Father. Jun-ho's voice was low. Even. Controlled in a way that cost him something visible. Janelle is dead. There is a child in the foster system who has been there for 3 years with his name removed from his records. And you flew from Seoul to sit in my office and tell me to let it go. I flew from Seoul, Tae-sung said, because you are my son. Is that what this is? Yes. The word landed between them, and neither of them picked it up. Tae-sung stood. He straightened his jacket, a gesture Jun-ho had watched 10,000 times, the patriarch reassembling his composure after it had threatened to slip. He moved toward the door and then stopped without turning around. The woman, he said. The caseworker. She cannot be controlled. No, Jun-ho said. She can't. A pause. She reminds me of someone, Tae-sung said. And he left before Jun-ho could ask who. That evening Aisha received a call from the foster home coordinator. The boy's file had been flagged for emergency transfer. A new placement request had come through a legal channel, processed with unusual speed. The transfer was scheduled for 72 hours from now. Under a different name. Aisha was already dialing Jun-ho before the coordinator finished the sentence. This is the kind of story that reminds you why strength matters. If you value dignity and respect, subscribe to Afro Korean Tales and Stories. These are the stories we tell here. They had 40 minutes. That was what the emergency injunction window came down to. 40 minutes between the moment Aisha reached the attorney she trusted, a woman named Patricia Owens who had been fighting family court battles for 20 years and who answered her phone at 9 p.m. the way some people answered at 9 a.m., completely and immediately, and the automated processing window that would have finalized the transfer. Patricia filed. The system acknowledged. The transfer was halted. Aisha sat back in her chair and realized her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear. From the specific physiological response to operating at that pitch of precision for 3 straight hours. Jun-ho was across the table from her. They had worked in his office. Her choice, because her own office no longer felt fully secure and his showroom had the kind of quiet that made thinking possible. He had made tea at some point that neither of them had drunk. He had moved her empty water glass twice without seeming to notice he was doing it. It's halted, she said. He exhaled. One slow, controlled breath that told her more about what the last 3 hours had cost him than anything he might have said. For how long? He asked. The injunction gives us a hearing window. 72 hours to file the supporting documentation. She looked at her notes. We have most of it. The birth record, the amendment trail, the agency dissolution records, the documented file intrusion from my office. Patricia thinks it's enough for a formal paternity review order. And if the park legal team contests it? They will, she said simply. They already have people watching the court filing system. Patricia has done this before. She knows how to layer the documentation, so contesting it in the short term actually makes them look worse, not better. Jun-ho looked at her. You plan for them to contest it. I plan for everything, she said. That's the job. He was quiet for a moment. Then, my father came to see me today. She had been waiting for this. I know. You called me after. I didn't tell you everything he said. She waited. He said she reminds him of someone. Jun-ho's eyes were on the table. When I told him you couldn't be controlled. He said, she reminds me of someone. And then he left. Aisha was still. He meant Janelle, Jun-ho said. He had to have meant Janelle. He looked up. Which means he was watching her. Before. He knew what she was. And he did it anyway, Aisha said. The sentence sat between them, and neither of them needed to finish it. She watched something travel across Junho's face, grief and fury moving together in the specific way they moved through people who had loved someone and lost them to something that should have been preventable. She had seen that expression on parents in emergency hearings, on siblings, on the faces of people sitting in hallways outside rooms where decisions about their families were being made by people who didn't know them. She had never let herself get close enough to feel it alongside someone before. She was feeling it now, and she was going to deal with that later. "Junho," she said. "His name. Steady. We have 72 hours. Stay focused." He nodded once. They worked until midnight. At some point he ordered food, Korean delivery, 2 containers of something warm that arrived in a paper bag. He set one in front of her without asking. She opened it and ate without ceremony, and he watched her for exactly 1 second with an expression she wasn't going to examine, and then he ate too. The food was good. She told him so. "My mother's recipe," he said. "Adapted." She'd probably say I've ruined it. "Is she like him?" "No," he said. "She's like someone who spent 40 years learning how to survive him." Aisha absorbed that. "Does she know about the boy?" "I don't know what she knows." He paused. "I don't know what she's been told versus what she's chosen not to ask. There's a difference. In my family there is always a difference," he said, "between what is known and what is said. They are almost never the same thing." They packed up at 12:30. At the door he said, "Thank you. This is the job," she said. "Not for me it isn't," he said quietly. "For me this is." He stopped. She didn't push. She nodded once and walked to her car. She was 3 blocks away when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She answered, breathing. Then a voice, male, older, accented in a way she now recognized. "Ms. Coleman. Park Tae-sung." Not through a representative. Directly. His voice in her ear for the first time. "Mr. Park," she said. "You stopped the transfer." "Yes." A pause. "I underestimated you." "Most people do," she said. Another pause. Longer. "I would like to meet with you. In person. Without lawyers. Without my son." Aisha kept her eyes on the road. "Why?" she asked. What he said next made her pull the car over. "Because I know something about the boy's mother that is not in any file. And I believe, for the first time in 3 years, that you are the only person I can tell it to who will know what to do with it. If you're still here at this hour, you already know this channel is for you. Strong women recognize strong women. And this one? She just pulled over on the side of the road, and I need you there with me for what comes next." She told Junho the next morning. She didn't have to. The meeting Tae-sung had requested was private, without lawyers, without his son. She could have kept it between herself and the patriarch and used whatever she learned to advance the case. That would have been the strategically clean choice. But she had built this with Junho. And she had learned, in the years since Marcus, that the cases that broke down were the ones where people made unilateral decisions about what other people could handle. She called him at 7:15. He picked up immediately, which meant he hadn't slept well either. She told him about the call. His father's voice. The offer of information. She told him exactly what Tae-sung had said, and she didn't soften it. The silence on the other end was 5 full seconds. "He called you directly," Junho said. "Yes. Not through a representative." "No. He's never done that," Junho said slowly. "In my entire life. He doesn't make direct contact when he can send someone. It's not about efficiency. It's about, he doesn't like to be refused directly. Representatives can absorb refusal. He can't. He called me directly," Aisha said. "Which means he's already calculated that I'll refuse a representative. He's trying to understand you. He's trying to stay 1 step ahead. But I think," she paused, working through it, "I think there's also something else. He said he believes I'm the only person who will know what to do with what he knows. That's not a power play. That's something closer to guilt," Junho said quietly. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Do you want me to come?" he asked. He asked for no lawyers, no son. "I'm not a lawyer." Jun-ho. "I know," he said. "I know. Go." A pause. "But Aisha, record everything. Whatever he says. Your phone, a backup, whatever you have." "I always record everything," she said. "I learned that from Marcus." She met Tae-sung in a private room at the Four Seasons. Not the ballroom, not the restaurant. A small meeting room on the 14th floor that felt like a space designed for conversations that weren't supposed to exist. He was already there when she arrived. Standing, the same way Jun-ho had been standing the first time she met him. She filed that detail quietly. He looked older in this room than he had at the gala. The gala had been his territory. Performance and power arranged around him like furniture. This room was neutral. Here he looked like what he was. A man in his 70s carrying something he had been carrying for a long time. He gestured to the chairs. She sat. He sat across from her. "You investigated the accident report," he said. "Not a question." "Yes. And you found it clean." "I found it constructed to appear clean," she said. "There's a difference." He looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression shifted. Recognition, she thought. The same recognition she had seen in the ballroom. Like she was confirming something he had already suspected about her. "Janelle Reeves did not die in an accident," he said. The room was very quiet. "I know that," Aisha said. She kept her voice steady. She had known this was coming and had prepared for it. Prepared to receive it as information, not as shock, because shock cost you the clarity you needed in the moments immediately after. "You know," he repeated. "I know the report is wrong. I don't yet know the mechanism. I don't have proof. I have a pattern and an instinct that has never failed me." She looked at him directly. "Tell me the mechanism." Tae-sung was quiet for a long moment. His hands rested on the table, still, composed. The posture of a man who had spent decades keeping himself contained. "I gave an instruction," he said, "to a man who had worked for me for many years. I told him to handle the situation. I meant..." He stopped. "In my world that phrase has a range of meanings. I understood what I was authorizing. I told myself I didn't." Aisha did not move. Did not break his gaze. This was the confession of a man who had authorized a murder through deliberate ambiguity and spent 3 years deciding whether to live fully inside the denial or step out of it. "His name," she said. "Kim Dong-woo. He is currently in Seoul. He has not been in the United States since Janelle died." "Is he reachable?" "By me," Tae-sung said. "Yes. I need his full contact information. I need documentation of his connection to you and his presence in Atlanta in the month before the accident. And I need you to understand," she leaned forward slightly, "that if you give me this information, you are giving me the ability to implicate yourself. You understand that?" "Yes," he said. "Why?" she asked. He looked at her for a long time. "Because my grandson is in a foster home," he said. "And the woman I sent someone to remove from my son's life was carrying that child." His voice didn't waver, but it changed. Something underneath it cracked, quietly, like a fracture in something that had been under pressure for years. "She was brave. And she loved my son in a way that I understood was real and chose to treat as a problem." He reached into his jacket and placed a folded piece of paper on the table. "Everything you need," he said. "Kim Dong-woo's location, his contact with my organization, and a recording I have kept for 3 years." Aisha looked at the paper. "A recording," she said. "Of the instruction I gave," Tae-sung said. "And his confirmation." The room held its breath. "You recorded yourself," she said slowly. "I did not trust myself not to forget," he said. "What I had done. Who I had been." He paused. "I think part of me always intended for it to be found. Eventually." Aisha picked up the paper. The cliffhanger was this. As she opened it and read the first line, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Patricia Owens, her attorney. The park legal team just filed a motion to remove you from the case. Emergency hearing. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. The hearing room was not dramatic. That was the thing about real legal battles. They didn't look like television. They looked like fluorescent lighting and folding chairs, and a judge who was already managing 4 other cases and who viewed everyone in the room with the efficient impartiality of someone whose job was to apply standard to chaos. Aisha sat beside Patricia Owens and kept her hands folded on the table. Across from them was a team of 3 attorneys, all in suits that communicated expense without announcing it. The lead attorney, a man named Gerald Whitmore, according to the name placard, had the precise, pleasant manner of someone who had won many rooms by making the opposing party feel slightly unreasonable for being there at all. "The motion," Whitmore said, addressing the judge, "is straightforward. Ms. Coleman has demonstrated a pattern of conduct that goes beyond the professional scope of a caseworker, including direct meetings with a party of interest, unauthorized retention of case documents outside department systems, and now apparent coordination with one of the biological claim parties." Patricia responded with the calm of someone who had been here many times. Ms. Coleman retained documents using established protocol for cases involving evidence of tampering. Her meetings were within professional scope. And the characterization of coordination. She met the male biological claimant 9 times in 11 days, Whitmore said. The room went quiet. Patricia didn't miss a beat. For the purpose of building an evidentiary record in a case involving documented file intrusion, physical threats to the caseworker, and evidence of fraudulent document alteration, all of which we have submitted to this court this morning. The judge looked at the submission stack. It was thick. Patricia had worked through most of the night. Aisha watched the judge's eyes move across the first page. She had learned to read rooms through the people managing them, and what she read now was a judge encountering a case that was significantly more complex than its initial filing had suggested. "Counsel," the judge said to Whitmore, "your client's organization is named in the evidentiary submission as the party responsible for the original document alteration. You understand the implication of that." Whitmore's pleasant manner didn't crack, but it tightened. "We contest the characterization." "You may contest it at the merits hearing," the judge said. "Motion to remove Ms. Coleman is denied. We'll schedule the full evidentiary hearing for," he checked his calendar, "10 days from today." Whitmore's team began conferring immediately, quietly, in the way of people recalculating. Outside the courtroom, Patricia put her hand briefly on Aisha's arm. "You did well. You did well," Aisha said. "I sat there." "You sat there without flinching for 90 minutes while 3 attorneys implied you were incompetent and inappropriate. That's not nothing." It wasn't nothing. But Aisha's mind was already on what came next. Tae-sung's recording. Kim Dong-woo in Seoul. 10 days to the merits hearing. And somewhere in a foster home in Atlanta, a small boy named Jun who drew figures and crossed them out. She was in the parking lot when Jun-ho fell into step beside her. She hadn't told him about the hearing. She had known he would come if she did, and the last thing she needed was a park present in a room where parks were already the subject of litigation. But he had found out anyway, which she should have anticipated. "You won," he said. "We delayed," she said. "That's different," Patricia says. Patricia is optimistic by professional necessity. She stopped walking, turned to face him. "The recording your father gave me, I need to get it to a forensic authentication service before the merits hearing. If it's authenticated, we hand it to law enforcement and the case changes entirely. It's no longer a custody matter. It becomes a criminal investigation." Jun-ho was very still. "And my father will face consequences," she said. "I told him that." He understood. The morning was cool. Atlanta in this season did cold in that particular way. Bright and sharp, the kind of cold that made everything look clearer than it probably was. He looked at her for a moment. "You're not going to ask me how I feel about that," he said. "No," she said. "You already know how you feel. You don't need me to name it." He looked away. Down the street. Back. "He loved my mother," he said, like he was trying to find the thread. "In his way. He built everything for the family. And then he decided that Janelle was a threat to the thing he built, and he stopped." His jaw worked. I keep trying to find the version of this where he's a person I can recognize. And I keep. He kept the recording, Aisha said quietly. For 3 years. Junho looked at her. That's not absolution, she said. But it's something. He nodded once. Slowly. They stood there for another moment in the parking lot of a courthouse. 2 people holding a case that had grown beyond anything ordinary, neither of them moving toward their car yet. The gala, Junho said. The one in Los Angeles. My father's team is still planning to attend. It's a charity event. It gives him legitimacy cover. His representation will be there, business contacts, political donors. Aisha looked at him. He wants to meet you there, Junho said. Publicly. In front of those people. Why? I think, Junho said slowly, because he wants to do something he can't do privately. Something that requires witnesses. Aisha thought about that for a moment. When? She said. 4 days. She looked at the courthouse behind them, then back at him. All right, she said. Neither of them said what they both understood, that whatever Tae-sung intended to do in that ballroom, there would be no controlling what happened after. She wore navy blue. Not because she had thought carefully about what to wear to a charity gala where one of the most powerful Korean crime patriarchs in America intended to do something public and irreversible. She wore it because it was the dress in her closet that made her feel most like herself. Structured shoulders, clean lines, nothing that asked for attention. She was not there to be noticed. She was there to be present. The ballroom was everything Chapter 1 had shown, and now the reader understood what Aisha had not known then. Every person in that room, every conversation and clinking glass and careful laughter, was the backdrop to something that had been building for 3 years across 2 continents and the life of one silent boy. Junho was already inside when she arrived. He found her near the entrance with a look that asked a question and then answered it simultaneously. She was fine, she was ready, she was not going to be anything other than exactly herself tonight. He's here, Junho said quietly. I know. He told me this morning what he intends to do. Did he tell you all of it? He told me enough. A pause. Aisha, if he does this, then things change, she said. That's the point. She moved into the room. She had been in spaces like this before. Not this expensive, not this dense with concentrated influence, but spaces where she was the only woman who looked like her, the only person in the room whose salary was public record. She had learned in those spaces that the only thing more disarming than wealth is someone who isn't impressed by it. She was not impressed. She accepted a glass of water from a passing server, found a position near the center of the room with a clear sight line to the main floor, and waited. Tae-sung found her 15 minutes in. He approached through the crowd in a way that parted it without effort, not because people moved deliberately but because something about his presence made space appear. He was dressed impeccably. His expression was composed. He looked like a man who had decided something and was no longer in conflict about it. He stopped in front of her. He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope, white, thick. Around them, the radius of silence began to grow. A gesture of appreciation, he said, for your work on a matter of importance to my family. And here they were. The moment from Chapter 1, fully arrived. Aisha looked at the envelope. She looked at him. I don't take money to forget children, she said. The gasps were real. The shift in the room was real. His advisor's half-step forward was real. She took the envelope from his hand, held it for exactly 2 seconds, then placed it back. I don't care who you are, she said. I won't sell a child's future. And then Tae-sung did the thing that nobody in that room could have anticipated. He bowed. Now the reader understands what Aisha had not understood in Chapter 1. The bow was not spontaneous. He had planned it. Because a man like Park Tae-sung did not act publicly without intention. The bow was a statement made in the one language that his world understood. The language of visible, unrepeatable deference. He was conceding. Not to the legal case. Not to the criminal exposure. To her. To what she represented. When he straightened, his voice was low enough that only Aisha heard the first part. You remind me of the woman my son loved, he said. And then louder so the room could hear. I owe this woman an acknowledgement that cannot be made privately. The room, which had been silently watching, went completely still. 3 years ago, a young woman named Janelle Reeves died on I-285. The official account called it an accident. His voice was even. He had rehearsed this. He was not going to break in public. That was not who he was. But the words were true, and the room could feel the difference between performed sincerity and the real thing. It was not an accident. It was the consequence of an instruction I gave to a man in my employ. I have cooperated fully with investigators. The man responsible is being extradited from Seoul. He paused. Janelle Reeves left behind a son. My grandson, who will be recognized as a member of this family. Formally. Completely. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Then the room erupted. Aisha stood in the center of it, completely still. The noise was enormous. Voices, questions, phones being raised, the particular chaos of 50 powerful people processing something that would reshape things they thought were settled. She found Jun-ho across the room. He was looking at his father. His expression was the most complicated thing she had ever seen on a human face. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. Something that was still working itself out and might take years to resolve. But underneath all of it, underneath the grief and the fury and the loss, something that might, eventually, if given enough time and honesty, become the beginning of understanding. Tae-sung turned back to Aisha. She waited. He reached into his jacket again. Not another envelope. A small photograph. He held it out to her. Janelle. Smiling. Wide and unguarded. The way the obituary had never shown her. He deserves to know what she looked like when she was happy, Tae-sung said. Aisha took the photograph. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that the moment hadn't already said better. But as she held the photograph and the ballroom chaos continued around her, her phone vibrated in her bag. Patricia Owens. A message consisting of 4 words. Call me. Right now. Patricia's voice on the phone was different. Aisha had known Patricia Owens for 6 years and had heard her in every register. Calm, urgent, exhausted, triumphant. This was none of those. This was the voice of someone who had just received information that changed the shape of the case they thought they were building. The extradition for Kim Dong-woo, Patricia said. It's been contested. Aisha stepped out of the ballroom into a quieter corridor. The noise from inside was still audible, a low continuous hum of disruption. Contested by whom? She asked. By 3 members of Tae-sung's organization who were not part of his decision to cooperate. They have their own exposure if Dong-woo testifies. They're applying pressure at the Seoul end to delay the extradition process, and they have enough reach to make that delay last 6 months minimum. Patricia paused. And Aisha, 2 of our witnesses have gone quiet. The placement coordinator and the records clerk who flagged the original amendment. Both of them stopped returning calls this afternoon. Aisha was very still in the corridor. Someone talked, she said. Or someone inside the park organization is moving independently of Tae-sung. Moving to protect themselves rather than comply with him. Which meant Tae-sung's public declaration tonight. The bow, the confession, the announcement, had triggered a counter-response from within his own network. People who had more to lose than he did. People who had not decided to cooperate. The forensic authentication on the recording, Aisha said. Is it complete? Received confirmation an hour ago. It's authenticated. Then we have the recording. We have the birth record. We have the documentation trail. She was thinking in sequence, the way she always did when things accelerated. Not trying to solve everything simultaneously but building the chain link by link. The witnesses going quiet hurts, but it doesn't kill us. The extradition delay is the real problem. 6 months is a long time, Aisha. The merits hearing is in 10 days. Without Dong-woo's testimony. We don't need his testimony for the custody matter, Aisha said. We need it for the criminal case. Those are 2 separate tracks. We win the custody track with what we have. The criminal track takes longer. And the boy gets placed with his father, Aisha said. That happens in 10 days regardless of what Dongwoo does or doesn't testify to. Nothing they do to the witnesses changes the birth record. Nothing they do changes Tae-sung's public statement tonight in front of 50 witnesses with phones. She paused. Tell me the child is safe. Bev called me an hour ago. He's fine. She's aware of the situation and she's a good placement, Aisha. I know. Aisha exhaled. I know she is. She went back inside. Junho found her before she found him. He read her face the way he had learned to read it. Quickly, accurately, without requiring her to perform composure she wasn't feeling. What happened, he said. She told him. All of it. The extradition contest. The witnesses going quiet. The people inside his father's organization who had decided not to follow Tae-sung's lead tonight. He listened without interrupting. This was one of the things about him she had stopped pretending not to notice, the quality of his listening. He didn't listen with the part of his brain that was already forming a response. He listened first. Completely. My father's people, he said when she finished. Not him. Him I can. He stopped. I can talk to him. Tonight. Before he leaves. He may not be able to stop them. His authority inside that organization just took a significant hit. He went public tonight. Some of them will read that as unpredictable. Unpredictable leadership loses loyalty fast. I know how it works, he said quietly. She looked at him. I know you do. They stood in the diminishing noise of the ballroom, the crowd still buzzing but beginning to thin, and Aisha felt the specific weight of a case that had expanded beyond its original boundaries. It had started with a file, a boy's photograph, a name in the father field that someone had tried to erase. Now it was this, a criminal network fracturing along lines of self-interest, an extradition contested across 2 countries, witnesses gone quiet, and a patriarch whose public confession had cost him his own people's loyalty. And still, at the center of all of it, a small boy in Atlanta who drew figures and crossed one of them out. She went home at midnight. She sat at her kitchen table. Same table as the beginning. Same cold tea. But not the same woman. Something had shifted and she could feel it, and she was not going to examine it carefully at midnight because she knew what she would find. She took the photograph Tae-sung had given her out of her bag. Janelle. Smiling. She set it on the table and looked at it for a long time. Then she opened her notebook to a fresh page and wrote one question at the top. Not a case note. Not a strategy item. What does the boy need to know about his mother? She wrote for an hour. Everything Junho had told her. Everything the photograph suggested. A woman who was brave and clear-eyed and loved without apology. A woman who had chosen a man her world said was the wrong choice and stood inside that choice with her whole self. Her phone buzzed. Junho. A message, short. I talked to my father. He's going to make calls tonight. I don't know if it will hold. But he's trying. Then, after a pause. Are you okay? She looked at the question for a moment. It was a simple question. People asked it 50 times a day without meaning it. He meant it. She typed back. Ask me again in 10 days. She saw the 3 dots appear. Pause. Disappear. And, I will. She put the phone down. Looked at Janelle's photograph one more time. Then she closed her notebook and went to bed. 10 days. Everything would change in 10 days. And somewhere in the corridor of a building where powerful people were making calls to protect themselves, a man whose loyalty to Tae-sung had already broken was picking up his own phone. His name was not Kim Dong-woo. He was someone closer. Someone none of them had considered. And he was not calling Seoul. He was calling Atlanta. If you've ever had to stand alone to protect your dignity, or someone else's, this channel was made for you. Subscribe to Afro Korean Tales and Stories. We're almost at the end of this story. And I promise you, what's coming will make everything worth the wait. The man's name was Lee Sung-jin. He had worked for Park Tae-sung for 19 years. Not as muscle. Not as legal cover. As something closer and more dangerous than either. He was the man who remembered everything. Schedules. Payments. Instructions given in private rooms that were never supposed to leave those rooms. He called Atlanta at 2 in the morning. Not Tae-sung's attorneys. Not Jun-ho. He called the FBI field office and asked for the agent assigned to the Kim Dong-woo extradition request. By 6 a.m., Aisha's phone was ringing. She answered it still half asleep and sat upright within 15 seconds of hearing Patricia's voice. Lee Sung-jin came forward, Patricia said. Voluntarily. Last night. He has documentation. Aisha. Physical documentation. Payment records, communications. A timeline of every instruction Tae-sung gave in the 4 months before Janelle died. He kept copies for 19 years as personal insurance. A pause. The extradition delay collapsed an hour ago. Dong-woo is being transferred. Aisha sat on the edge of her bed in the early morning dark and let that land. Not with relief. With something heavier and more specific than relief. The feeling of a structure that had been built slowly, carefully, under pressure, finally bearing the weight it was designed to carry. The merits hearing, she said. Still on. 10 a.m. But Aisha, we don't need it to be a fight anymore. The criminal investigation is now federal. Custody will follow the paternity establishment automatically. Patricia's voice had shifted, still professional, but underneath it something warm. You built this. Document by document. You built it so well that when it fell completely. Aisha thanked her. Ended the call. She sat for another moment. Then she picked up her notebook, opened it to the page where she had written what does the boy need to know about his mother, and she read what she had written. All of it. Janelle's laugh. Her directness. The way she had never made Jun-ho feel like a problem to be managed. She tore the page out carefully. She folded it. She put it in her bag. The courthouse at 10 a.m. was different from the emergency hearing. This time Jun-ho was beside her at the table, not absent from it. Patricia had filed the documentation. The federal investigation had been acknowledged by the court. The park legal team was present but reduced. Whitmore was still there, but 2 of his colleagues were not, and the ones remaining had the careful, recalibrated posture of people who understood the ground had shifted under them overnight. The judge reviewed the submission for 11 minutes in silence. Aisha watched the clock. Jun-ho was still beside her. Not moving. Not speaking. His hands were flat on the table the same way they had been in the coffee shop the first day they met, and she understood now that it was what he did when he was holding himself together by decision rather than by ease. She moved her hand across the table and placed it over his. Once. Brief. Then pulled it back. He didn't look at her, but his hands relaxed. The court recognizes the paternity establishment as documented, the judge said. The child designated in these proceedings as Daniel, legal name to be restored to Jun Park, is to be placed in the custody of the biological father, Park Jun-ho, pending a standard transitional review period. He looked up over his glasses. Ms. Coleman, your department will oversee the transition? Yes, Your Honor, she said. Then we're adjourned. That was it. 11 minutes of review. 1 sentence. And 3 years of a child's erased life began to be written back. They went to the foster home that afternoon. Not just Jun-ho. Aisha too, because she was the caseworker and because Bev had called that morning and said simply, "He's been asking if you're coming." She was coming. They drove separately. Aisha arrived first, which gave her 5 minutes alone with the boy before Jun-ho came through the door. She used those minutes the way she used most quiet moments, without performance. She sat beside him at the kitchen table. He was drawing. A house. A sun. 2 figures outside. Side by side. Neither one crossed out. She put the folded page from her notebook on the table in front of him. I wrote some things down, she said. About your mom. Things that someone who loved her told me. She paused. You don't have to read it now. But it's yours. He looked at the folded paper. Then, very carefully, he picked it up and put it in the front pocket of his shirt. Right over his chest. The front door opened. Bev led Jun-ho in, and then stepped back in the way of someone who understood that what was about to happen needed room. The boy turned around. He and Jun-ho looked at each other from across the kitchen. Neither of them moved for a moment. The boy's eyes traveled over Junho's face with the particular thoroughness of a child cataloging something important. Junho stood completely still and let himself be looked at. Then the boy crossed the kitchen. He stopped in front of Junho and reached up with both hands and touched his face. Both cheeks. The way you confirm something real. Junho made a sound that was not quite a word. His eyes closed. He knelt down to the boy's level and stayed there, not reaching yet, waiting. The boy leaned forward and put his head against Junho's shoulder. Aisha looked at Bev. Bev was looking at the ceiling. Her keys were in both hands, and she was turning them over and over quietly. Aisha looked back at the table. At the drawing still sitting there. 2 figures. Side by side. Neither one crossed out. She thought of Marcus. She thought of his gap-toothed smile and the folded paper shapes he pressed into her hands with such seriousness. She thought of the case file she had signed too quickly and the 3 weeks she had spent afterward not knowing how to put herself back together. She had put herself back together by coming back. By opening the next file. By never signing off too quickly again. This was the next file. This was the reason she had come back. 2 weeks later, Tae-sung appeared at a federal proceeding in Atlanta. He came without his attorneys. He sat in the gallery. When the judge acknowledged his presence and noted his cooperation, he bowed his head once. Not the bow from the ballroom. That one had been public and deliberate and designed to be witnessed. This one was private. Directed at no one in the room in particular. Maybe directed at Janelle. Maybe at the years he couldn't return. Maybe at some version of himself he had buried so long ago he had stopped believing it ever existed. After the proceeding, he found Aisha in the hallway. He stood in front of her. Straight. His age visible in a way it hadn't been at the gala. He looked like a man who had set down something extremely heavy and was still adjusting to what his body felt like without the weight. He bowed. This one was different from both the others. It was quiet. Private. Without witnesses except the empty courthouse hallway and the fluorescent lights and the sound of a city continuing its ordinary Tuesday. It was the truest one. Aisha received it without flinching. Without warmth and without coldness. With a specific kind of dignity that doesn't require the other person to be fully redeemed in order to acknowledge what they've done. She nodded once. Take care of him, she said. She meant Junho. She might have meant the boy. She might have meant both. Tae-sung said, I will try. That was the most honest thing she had ever heard him say. She walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon. Her car was in the lot. She had 3 other files on her desk. Red for urgent, yellow for watch. She had a plant that was somehow still alive. She had a notebook with fresh pages. She had done this. Not alone. Never alone, she had learned that. With Patricia and Bev and Carol and Junho and even, at the end, with a man she had every reason to despise who had kept a recording for 3 years because some last surviving piece of his conscience refused to let him fully forget. She got in her car. Her phone buzzed. Junho. A photograph. No message. Just the image. The boy, sitting at a kitchen table. A different kitchen now, Junho's kitchen. In front of him, a bowl of something warm. He was looking at the camera with the expression she had first seen across a foster home table. Careful, watchful, older than his years. But something was different. His hand was on the folded page from her notebook, still tucked in his shirt pocket. And he was almost smiling. Aisha looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she started the car. She had files to open. Children to find. A system that would try to make her move fast. Sign off. Go to the next one. She would push back against it the same way she always had. Slowly, carefully, with copies of everything and the name Marcus written somewhere she could always find it. She pulled out of the parking lot. And on her desk in Atlanta, a new file had arrived while she was gone. A child. A name that had been altered. A family with power that didn't want anyone looking closely. She would be there in 20 minutes. She was already thinking about what questions to ask. Some people measure power by how much they can offer. But the rarest power belongs to those who cannot be bought, and who keep showing up, even after they've already been broken. And somewhere, in another room filled with powerful people, another envelope is already waiting for the next woman who will refuse it. This is a channel for women who understand that strength isn't loud. It's steady. And it shows up every single time. I'll see you in the next story. Thank you for watching Afro Korean Tales and Stories. As we close this story, I want to say something to the women watching. Some of you have lived through moments like this. Moments where you had to stand alone. Moments where you chose dignity over comfort. Moments where you refused to be bought, silenced, or pushed aside. That kind of strength doesn't always make noise, but it changes rooms. If you are a woman who believes respect is worth more than money, if you believe character still matters, if you believe dignity should never be negotiated, then this channel was made for you. I tell stories about women who stand firm, women who earn respect without begging for it, women who remind powerful people that integrity cannot be purchased. If that speaks to you, I invite you to subscribe and become part of this community. And if this story touched you, comment the word dignity below. I read your comments, and they help these stories reach more women like you. Until the next story, remember, not every powerful person leads with honor, but every strong woman carries it within her. I'll see you in the next one.